Fantasy exists so we can imagine worlds filled with short, hairy dudes and variably androgynous thin people. If you don't have both, you're doing it wrong, so today we're going to discuss the implementation of various fantasy races, which of course we will refer to as races and not species, because that prior word has no strange connotations in this context whatsoever, but by the time this conversation is over, we'll have made one of the fantasy universes of all time. But first things first, we need to address the elephant in the room. My world map wasn't made with adding new fantasy races in mind, so we need to find a way to put them in. As things stand, we've got the Kingdom of Kingia, where all the good humans are, the Kingdom of Evilia, where all the bad humans and the orcs are, and then where somebody vaguely Middle Eastern themed lives, but we're not really sure who that is. So we've got two options. We can just shove everybody we're about to make into Kingia, Evilia, or we can make new continents. Both ideas have their upsides and their downsides. If we just shove everybody in, then we won't really be making any new societies out of these new species. This is a significant upside because then we don't have to name any new kings or towns or whatever, and all our new inclusions can be the glorified palette swaps I always wanted them to be. The downside is that I'll have to remember that all of these new species exist and come up with names more complex than Bob and Steve when one of them shows up as a random passerby so that you can tell what they are. You might buy a medieval peasant named Steve, but probably not a 700-year-old wood elf druid. But the main kicker is that I'd have to think about how these different species with vastly different lifespans and attitudes interact with one another on an almost daily basis, and that's honestly far too much work just to get hot people with pointy ears and short hairy dudes into the story. And I could do it. I know what it would look like. They'd all get along but grumble about one being tree huggers and the other being arrogant, and nothing else of note nor any strife would ever arise. But, doing that, it's been done too many times before, unlike what I'm about to suggest. You see, having to make new continents for these beings will be some work up front, but the upside is that when I don't want any elves or dwarves or other glup shittos around, I can confine them to their respective ethnostates and forget they exist for a while. Not to mention, the extra continents will add to my world's already incomprehensibly vast and complex scale. Tolkien would spin in his grave and Martin will cry at its sheer majesty. And so meet the continent of Fantasia. Not to be confused with Fantasia, which is an underbaked ripoff of what we're doing here. We don't have any stupid rats in wizard costumes. Look, we'll add another S to the spelling and make it clear that it's Fantasia just to really settle the difference. Just in case, for legal purposes, you understand. But Fantasia is the land of all fantasy races except for the evil orcs that have to be close in proximity to Kingia so that they can go fight them whenever they want. The peoples of Fantasia are an indeterminate distance away from the other continents. If their aid would ever be particularly useful, they're far too distant to be of any help. Months by sea, at least. If our protagonist has a liaison with his elf girlfriend, however, it'll maybe be a week or two. Or he can just use his super special protagonist powers to get there faster because, as you know, he was chosen by the gods. However, so that we can keep things nice and digestible for our stupid mouth-breathing audience, since concepts of different species having enclaves across other realms might confuse them, we'll say that it does take a while to get between Fantasia and Kingia, and that, therefore, basically everybody just stays in their home kingdom. It's not like we can really have areas that are largely one species, and then more metropolitan areas would have a greater variety of peoples. That'd be too confusing and unrealistic. But the important thing is that we have Fantasia, and now it is time to begin populating it with all sorts of creatures. First on the list, of course, are the elves. They're always elves, but we're going to make the bestest elves that ever elfed. D&D elves live for 800 years, while ours live for 8,000 years. Now, considering that this flat earth that Kingia is on has only been around for 6,000 years, the elves may not actually know they can live that long yet. Or so you'd think, but the ancient wisdom the elves are always famous for has keyed them into their exact death date. This is a detail we'll throw in there because it sounds really cool, but none of the elves will ever really think about the fact that they basically live their entire lives on a timer that counts down to the exact moment it'll end. It's really not a very interesting thing, so they're never going to dwell on it that much. But more importantly, not only does every fantasy universe have elves, but they also have varieties of elves. High elves, dark elves, and wood elves being the most common. Sometimes there are also like moon elves or solar elves or whatever. So we'll scoop all of those up and then with some special sauce and bespoke seasoning, make some more. So we've got the leaf elves, the higher elves who supply Wizard the Wise's mage dust, the Uranus elves. We do still have the planet Uranus in this universe. It's important to remember. The rock elves, the Thursday elves who only come out once a week. And most importantly, the belves, where the B stands for better. Whenever the belves enter a conversation with someone, they magically grow to be 1 inch taller than them, and then their physiology morphs to make them look like a more attractive relative of the person they're speaking to. The belves are basically better than everyone, except for our protagonist. It's very important to remember that with elves in general, you might be tempted to make them wiser or smarter or faster, stronger or more skilled or in some way better than your protagonist just because they're ageless and have hundreds of years to train and learn with bodies that never weaken over time. This is a ridiculous assumption because nobody is better than your protagonist. Have some self-esteem on their behalf. And also remember that the best way to write elves is as if you hate them and don't even want them to exist in your universe. This can make sense if you write them to be arrogant beyond belief, but it's even better if they act essentially like anybody else, but are still hated on inexplicably, constantly lose battles and wars because that extra 800 years learning how to fight really didn't count for much after all, and in general are the butt of every joke, just as they rightfully should be. Anyway, here's a bunch of random splotches of elves because they're freeform and stuff. We have like Elf Forest where the elves live, the wood elves live, that is. Elfia where the high elves live, and then a couple of kingdoms where the text is small, I know, but just trust that I placed them all thoughtfully. But now on to our dwarves. Dwarves are easy. Every dwarf is bearded, mines, likes beer and gold, lives in a cave or a mountain, and is probably a dude. Boom, done. God, I love my dwarves who live in the Mountain Kingdom. They're so complex. Next are the halflings. Halflings are stupid and lame, and I'll never understand why Tolkien put them in his books that I haven't read and wouldn't, because who wants to read about an unassuming hairy-footed hero saving the world due to the one thing that he has that nobody else does, unblemished and unconditional love for his friends? That's lame as hell. So our world did have halflings, but they lived in Stupidton. Stupidton was burned down when the orcs of Evilia sailed here long ago. They skipped right over the elves and dwarves and came straight here, burned it all down, flooded it, burned it down again, then roved over the lands with flamethrowers and mustard gas just to make sure they got all the hairy little bastards, and then left and forgot how to make flamethrowers and mustard gas. Boom! Problem solved. We filled the obligatory halfling spot, but also killed them because they're lame and don't deserve to live. What could be better? All right. You probably do want to have a little bit more about the dwarves. They like pickaxes and axes. They also forge good weapons. Moving on. Then we've got to have our ogres. There are two kinds of ogres, really. There's ogres that look like orcs and ogres that look like people. The ones that look like orcs are fine and all, but I want to use the ones that look like humans more. Then I can make them look like people I don't like. The ogres are big and dumb and do whatever anybody tells them. They're basically big cavemen. What do they spend their time doing? Being random encounters for heroes across the land, basically. You know, they bash things with their sticks in their free time also, I guess. And, I mean, look, it's not like anybody would ever want to hire something so physically imposing yet also capable of sentient thought for something like bodyguard work, so they tend to never really have jobs or exist in society. Ogres are really just random encounters at the end of the day. I also almost forgot about goblins. Goblins are worth forgetting about, though. They're green and they steal things, but they kind of stop existing once our hero hits level 3 because at that point they're too weak to make an interesting fight anymore. So overall, goblins just really aren't worth consideration. But what is worth consideration is today's sponsor, World Anvil. Writing is complicated. World building is complicated, especially when you're working with sci-fi, fantasy, or other speculative fiction genres. Keeping track of all the relevant information from characters to countries to magic systems can be tricky, and it's very easy to get very disorganized. World Anvil might just be the solution to those problems. It's got a ready-made template and format for all your writing and world building needs, making making it easy to get all your information down and keep it in proper order. Need templates to keep track of character information? World Anvil's got it. Need an interactive map so you can develop the unique personality of each country, town, and village? World Anvil covers that. Need templates for magic systems? Once again, World Anvil has come prepared. Even timelines feature is something World Anvil can help you organize, and let me tell you, the histories of fantasy worlds get very detailed, and having a visual indicator to keep it all straight can be invaluable. All put together, it can really get you that wiki vibe where all your world building is part of a solid ecosystem, where you can jump from one topic to the next with ease and add to any given subtopic as needed. So, if World Anvil sounds like the answer to your writing and world building needs, check them out at worldanvil.com and use the coupon code JBAT for a 51% off discount on any yearly membership. That's worldanvil.com, which will be linked in the description below. Once again, that's code JBAT for 51% off an annual plan, and thank you for not skipping the ad. But moving on, what about orcs? Orcs are where it's at. Now, of course, orcs have 3 current flavors in popular media. There's British football hooligan orcs, basically demon orcs, and vaguely Hispanic. These all have their uses, but the former is my favorite by far. But I'm not British, I'm from the US of A, where we have these big mountains called the Appalachians where Bigfoot or the skinwalkers come to take you in the night. I know, it happened to several of my classmates. And we have a lot of things here, but only one of them is right for my fantasy world. So meet the Nazcorks. These are different from the Evilia orcs, who are just basically green demons. They don't really need any development because they just exist to be slaughtered. And they're evil because I said so. And also their overlords, Warlock the Evil, Dark Canis, and many others also said so. But not the Nazcorks. They're a big fan of this big race they have where they ride these wagons around in a big circle at magically enhanced incredible speeds. Massive crashes and fights break out that see carts and Nazcorks slammed against the wall at insane velocities, to a cheering audience eagerly awaiting the bloodshed. They all talk like this and are even more drunk than the dwarves. The Nazcorks are known for wearing bright colors, and the bigger Nazcork businesses paint their logos on the wagons as they race around the arena for advertising. Nazcork racing is mega illegal everywhere else in the world, but the Nazcorks don't care at all. All decisions are determined by race. Suing someone, race them for the damages. Want to fight someone, race them instead and pit maneuver them into the wall going 150 miles an hour. Divorce, winner, or survivor takes the kids. It's a flawless system. We're putting them here in this big donut. It's the biggest race course of them all, where the Nazcorks once a year send out their best and brightest to race the whole landmass. Winner is Supreme Commander of Nazcorkdom. Man, I feel weird after that one. I feel like I almost exercised some creativity there. It's a very, very close call. We can't be doing that anytime soon again. It's a bad thing to do for a number of reasons. Okay, you still want a little bit more about the dwarves? Fine. They also have a lot of drinking songs about digging and mining in holes. Back to things we actually care about, we've almost covered all of our obligatory standard fantasy race archetypes. There are also gnomes in some settings, but they're even lamer than halflings, because they are, in fact, just scrawny halflings. But we have to have them since it's a requirement for our setting to be fantasy, and so lo, here's what became of them. In this place, Nomia, the gnomes existed for an amount of time. Then the plot of Romeo and Juliet happened, except in that bit in the end when they get buried in the rubble and they don't come out for a while, it's actually because they're dead. Then when the humans come back home, they break all the rest of the gnomes with hammers. The end. There are also half-orcs and half-elves around, and why are there only halves of those? Why not half-dwarfs? Because dwarves are smelly, I guess. Smellier than orcs? Who knows? But anyway, half-orcs are really half-Nazcorks in this world. Blend the racing fever of a Nazcork with the potential of being a protagonist and not a side character that humans have. Half-elves are just people with pointier ears and slightly longer lifespan. There's really not much of interest in such a person knowing that they'll outlive one of their parents by centuries, but knowing that the other parent will outlive them by centuries. Nor anything weird about that pairing to begin with for a very similar reason. Alas. But now we've reached the free space, the place where we come to make all our brand new, fresh, never-before-seen species. So first, I present to you the species I'll be playing in my kludged attempt to put this world into D&D. The Blood Edges.
The blood edges have skin as gray as the ash of my incinerated enemies, eyes red as the blood of innocents I've spilled, and hair as black as the night on which I got my first kill.
The Blood Edges are a heroic culture of definitely not palette-swapped humans. They live for 500 years because they are 500 times better than humans. They're also smarter and stronger and stealthier and bloodier, killier, deadlier, and also cooler than humans. Also hotter. They're basically better than humans and elves in every possible way. But they aren't immortal yet because then they can still angst about mortality and fate and stuff. These guys will sell books, and will only write these guys or humans as protagonists because only they will actually matter. Another fantasy race we've got are the Greemans. They're humans, but green. But not orc green, more like Mountain Dew green. Then we have the Borble Snorts. Every good fictional universe needs its Glupshido, and these are them. They exist to basically be a pet species to the protagonist, and they come in all sorts of easily marketable forms. They have the Borble Snort Minoris, the small ones that'll do well as bumper stickers and plushies, and can be carried around by our protagonist to keep the eyes of our mouth-breathing audience on the page or screen. Remember, this is going to be a movie one day.
Oh look, cute thing. I need to throw my money at this franchise now.
There is also the Borble Snort Majoris, which can fill our Chewbacca role. You know, the Chewbacca role, the big guy that doesn't talk so you don't need to write any more dialogue, but still manages to make the cast bigger. They're always meant to be the stock strongman that can solve problems with brute force alone. Now, of course, in reality, our protagonist is stronger than our Borble Snort Majoris, but sometimes they have to let the Borble Snort do something so that the other characters in the group can pretend that they matter. Then, finally, are the Bedugs. Like our ogres and also our Evilia orcs, they exist to be ugly and killable. There are a ton of them, and they're all stupid and uncompromisingly evil. Nothing else about them actually matters all that much. They just provide a little visual intrigue if we want to kill something other than orcs or evil humans, or any damnable halflings that managed to stick around this long. But the Bedugs, just so I can pretend that I cared about making them, were founded by the infamous warlord Snagglewort Slugman, who also helped wipe out the halflings from earlier, and also cast the discarded shards of the gnomes into the sea, and also killed like 30 other elf subvariants, including the ethereal star elves, who were mystical and important and stuff, and their dying set off the series of tragedies that has helped to establish this world's grim dark tone, because the greatest beings to ever be have long since died. Speaking of, there's also the Ancients. You know, the Ancients. There are always Ancients. I don't really care what they look like, though, or did, or thought, or believed in, or otherwise were, but I will refer to them whenever I want to bring about some ancient megastructure, or give my protagonist just a gun or a laser rifle or something, because I've gotten tired of describing sword fights and just want him to get on with the killing already. Oh, and last but not least, there's also the Borks, which are like orcs but badder. They're the badder orcs. But with all of that established, hopefully now you know how to world build your fantasy races in the way of all time. Anyway, if this sounds like a place you want to be, we have a Discord if you want to hang out with my editor and I, and a Patreon if you're crazy enough to want to, where we post all our videos early. As we close out, I'd like to thank those patrons of ours: Sonny, Isaac Parrott, Raymond, Don Sadako, Cavalier Sazabi, Shieldmaid Fenya, and Michelle of the Knights of the Inner Circle. Vian and Jody on Void, our Knights, and Greer, TOW, Craig, Victoria, Lauren, Noah, Saint Sir Nicholas, Joush, and Kelly Citrin, our loyal squires. And remember, all right, you get one more thing about dwarves. For real, this time. One could think of elves as wise, yet unlearned in more advanced sciences, while dwarves are very learned, yet also unwise. It's often their own greed that brings about their downfall. One of the defining dwarf archetypes to me is when, in their greed for more, for wealth, glory, fame, or advancement, they dig too deep. In the dark heart of the earth, they discover something resting, something that awakens at their touch, that breathes malevolence and devours light, something that will consume the